Okay, hi Adam. How you doing today?
I'm great. It's a beautiful morning. I'm in Staten Island. A beautiful haze from Canada. Thank you, Canada.
Yeah, once again we got haze. Not as bad as last time. Not as apocalyptic, but I got to say it's a good day because you have finally come through with with an Israeli security expert as you promised. So well done. Even though I beat you to it, and I'm never going to let you forget it. But we're cool.
I, I I'm speechless. But I'm sure this is going to cost me somehow, somewhere. So we'll see what it does.
No, it's not going to cost you. I'm giving you a bad time, but the truth is we have someone great on, an old friend of both of ours, and this is someone who is what can we say about David? He is, people don't know it, but he is a titan in the security world, a Jedi master, an A-lister, someone who has done a lot of stuff you know about, probably you've heard about, that he can't talk about, but that you haven't heard of and that you don't know. So, David, great to have you on. Glad you could make the time in your very busy schedule to join us for a little bit.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here, and it's great to see you again. It's been too long. And thanks for the kind words. I
Yeah,
really
it's
don't deserve it.
no, you do absolutely, and yeah, unfortunately, we couldn't see you this week. It ends up we're filming right just as Cyber Week in Israel is wrapping up. Adam and I weren't able to be there with the cool people, but on LinkedIn it
Mm.
looked like everyone was having a good time.
Yeah, well, everything looks good on LinkedIn, but no, there were interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
It's like the
They say
Instagram.
they say they say LinkedIn adds 20 to 30 pounds to your picture.
That's, then I should send someone a gift for in LinkedIn. No, Cyber Week was a great event, great conference, great venue for meeting people and catching up, and also just getting exposed to some pretty interesting stuff that's going on now in the industry. It's too bad that you couldn't come, but next year you have to come.
Okay, we'll make it
Yeah,
next year.
I keep trying to convince my wife that we need to do a family trip, but she's afraid. Every time I want to go to Israel, she's like, "We're supposed to spend time with family, not everybody else." I have like
Well,
20, 30 people to see.
you can spend time with
Business.
with your extended cyber family.
Yes, that's what
There
it
you
is.
go. All right. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background to the extent that you'd like to?
Sure thing. So, David Warshavski, born and raised in Tel Aviv. Like many of my peers, I am a graduate of a military unit called 8200. Some of you have heard about it. It's the Israeli equivalent of the American NSA or the British GCHQ. And many of the technologies, and startups, and cyber defenders that the world knows and heard about and uses are graduates of that unit. And we can talk extensively as to why that is. But I guess more to the point, I'm currently VP of Enterprise Security and Adversarial Tactics at a company called Signia, which is basically an incident response and cyber consultancy firm. We do two things in life. Like 50% of the time, is what we do is incident response, day in, day out, multiple threat actors across multiple arenas and multiple sectors. Mostly, mostly doing battle against some of the more well-known threat actors, some of them nation states, North Koreans, Iranians, Russians, obviously, and Chinese as well. We operate globally. We have hubs in North America, Latin America, Europe, Southeast Asia, and are headquartered in Tel Aviv. Most of our team members are graduates of the unit and adjacent units in the military, and we very much have that military setup and spirit in a way that we leverage and capitalize on what we've done during our military service to better serve our clients, the organizations that we work with, that they, fortunately, that's just the sad reality today. We're seeing they're under constant attack in a never increasing fashion by some of these nation state adversaries. So that's in a nutshell who I am, what I do. I do. I live in Tel Aviv with my beautiful wife and two cats, and they have the tendency to join me on some of my Zoom sessions. So if you'll see one of them, that is a valuable member of the team.
No, it happens. I think I've locked my cats out of the room here, but they have a way of getting through,
Sneaky,
so,
sneaky, sneaky bastards.
but,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's great. So, I just want to tell everyone, it's like, a lot of what we talk about on the show is kind of the nuts and bolts of security and how a lot of things are not so exotic and not so exciting all the time. But you do the cool stuff. It's hard work and it's tough, but it is the really, the some of the really interesting work. So that's cool.
I would argue, and this is something that took me a while to internalize, but I would argue that I do the cool stuff that I wish on no one, like the incident response piece, especially if it's a
Right.
disruptive attack, a ransomware attack against critical infrastructure. That happens usually because someone else didn't take care of the boring stuff.
Yeah, and that's going to be my point, right? I have to imagine that being on an incident response team, being able to go at a moment's notice, and then having that level of anxiety and that pressure on you to resolve issues that are real world. And what I mean by real world, some of them might be affecting, human beings in a way, but some can also cause financial disruption. And that responsibility sits on you and your team in order for you to repel that adversary and hopefully have that continuation of business and functionality. There's a lot of pressure on you to do that. And even though I love watching it on TV and it always looks romantic, I know in real life you're sitting there and like I'm stressed. I've spoken to you before when I believe that you're involved in certain situations, and I can tell there's a lot of pressure on you. So God bless you. It's a lot of work.
It's one of the things that we instill. Well, even before that, when we hire team members for Sydney, one of the things that we basically search for two things: attitude and aptitude. We obviously have to have the skills to get the job done, or at least learn in time to get the job done. But the aptitude, that's the stuff that will, if you don't have it, that will kill you mentally. As in, we have team members that obviously find it difficult to thrive in an environment of almost complete uncertainty. So when we get called in, suppose a company gets hacked, ransomware has been deployed, it's chaos. Their team members are running like headless chickens sometimes, and not it's their fault. No one taught them what to do, all the way from the IT level to security level, security team, up to the executive leadership. We don't exactly teach you this at business schools, right? How to handle a cyber crisis. And so when we arrive at the scene, it's very chaotic, and we have to bring in that sort of that calmness, that peace of mind that will get the job done. Will lead you out of this crisis, and we have specialized teams across crisis management, remediation, recovery, forensics investigation, even negotiation. We can talk a lot about how we do the negotiation piece with the threat actors. It's very interesting. And you have to be able to deal with uncertainty on so many levels. You have to be able, from an executive leadership perspective, I've seen CEOs, board members that they didn't know if they will have a company in a few days. And what we say in these situations, your pressure is mine pressure as well. I won't leave until the job is done. And so every team member should be willing to accept on himself or herself that kind of immense pressure. And as you can imagine, it can be brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting on the show. We've talked a lot about how there's the technical side of security, and talk about that, and of course you guys are very skilled in that, really at the top of anyone's game. But the psychology of it and the culture and the communication is so important too. And I think you're very right that that's never more apparent than in an incident. Because I mean, one of the things I love to say about incidents is, an old Mike Tyson quote that everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Yeah, and that's so true with incidents, especially some of the really big ones of company extinction level events. That's gotta be a lot, and I think people do come to you to say, bring not just the expertise but the confidence.
And the calmness.
And the calmness as well. It's so important. We had a couple of cases where one of the IT team members in the company that was attacked got a heart attack halfway through the incident, which was pretty brutal. He survived, yeah, but it's
Wow.
and then we had another case where the IT manager sort of like a nervous breakdown. We had to step in and again, it's not anyone's fault as in to say that usually no one prepares you for this. Like you said, you get punched, even if they do have plans, you get punched in the face. It's not something you prepare to, and you need the resilience and resilience. Even in Cyber Week, I've attended several sessions where the main topic that was discussed was resilience. We even had a keynote by professor, distinguished professor from Harvard, Tal Ben Shachar, I think, yeah, in Israeli, that at least taught at Harvard and does research at Harvard. And he is very well known researching positive psychology. Adam Grant was one of his students. And he talks a lot about resilience 2.0 and anti-fragility. So that ability to bounce back, but not just bounce back at the same height, but bounce back higher. He talks a lot about not PTSD. He talks about PTG, post-traumatic growth. And that is something that we see a lot working with some of the companies that we work for years now, is that we've seen the team members, the executives that led through crisis successfully. They've gone and they managed to bring the company and themselves, their own psyche, to a situation where the next big attack, it's more of a brush on the, so they can shrug it off, at least mentally, because they've lived through that. Some not as lucky, but it's important that you know that this thing exists, PTG, post-traumatic growth. It's possible to grow in a healthy way out of these crises.
As an EMT, when I've showed up to New York City 911 calls, I've always had that anxiety. I'm walking into a situation, especially when somebody's dying or it's been a major accident, and you have to provide a calmness, and it's the only way I can associate what you do, Dave, to that. But I've also been in incident response, nothing as crazy, and keeping calm, following the protocols and policies and procedures put in place. And we've spoken about that before. When you practice that, when you work it, it's great. It puts you in a better position, but nothing prepares you when it actually happens. And I can only imagine the anxiety. And I will tell you this, Joe, I've been in the ring and I've been sparring. And when I'm getting overwhelmed, keeping calm is the only way to survive. Even if you're getting the living crap kicked out of you, you try to remain calm, because the more calm you are, the better you're going to handle that attack. So I don't know if that's the same in your incident response, Dave, but that's the only way I can imagine it.
Well, I think there's something to that, and having a little bit of training in it, because Dave, what you were saying is they don't teach this in business school, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I've not being full time, and I'm someone who's been dealing with incident response for a long time, but thankfully not being involved in heavy incidents and stuff. The majority of security professionals really spend their time on the preparation side, as I have. But I try, and it's funny. you put together your plans and you have all these meetings and people buy into it and do everything, but you'll even do that tabletop maybe once a year with your executive group and people who get dragged into this who don't want to do it. They're busy, they're looking at their watches, waiting for it to be over, and you think to yourself, they don't have any conception of what things are really going to be like. They're really not being trained in the amount of stress and everything that goes along with it. In business, there's competition, but there's not typically, attacks and immediate threats in most cases. So yeah, it's really interesting how different it is.
Yeah, one of the reasons why when we hire team members and we have global teams, now our preference is to hire military veterans or veterans of organizations that encountered crisis situations in the past. You said, thankfully, going back to what you said, thankfully, I haven't been in this heavyweight attack or such a destructive attack. I would say, be careful what you wish for, but don't be thankful. As in, yeah, I wish that
Yes.
anyone, at least once, be in this situation. Well, hopefully, it will be resolved for the better, right? But there are learning opportunities. You have to be optimistic, right? There are learning opportunities almost everywhere, and it's not that I've started this being this calm, reserved individual. I've certainly lost my nerve a couple of times. I've been in situations where a small slip up would bring about a lot of damage, and it's important that you have strict control as much as you can over the situation, but accept that there's a lot of uncertainty and other things that you can't control. I'll give you one example. We had an incident, a ransomware incident. This was Conti, I believe. Yeah, one of the more prolific groups. Um, and we won't talk about the location or the industry, but in that incident, a ransomware has been deployed. We got in, we conducted the forensic investigation. We knew exactly what had happened in a matter of, I think, 48 hours. We had the entire timeline, almost the entire timeline, from start to end. It's very amazing work by the investigation team, by the forensics team. We set out to remediate and recover the environment. We had the backups. The problem was that the way that its specific ransomware spread itself, even though it was deployed, it was via GPO. Yeah, and so it had a way to deploy manually, but also semi-autonomously, as in there was a risk in that someone in the environment might do something, inadvertently trigger the ransomware again. And it was very close. It almost happened that one of the technicians, one of the team members that was helping us recover all these assets, this is a very, very complex, heavy OT environment. He accidentally triggered the ransomware again in a way that didn't cause.
Wow.
We built compensating controls around it, as in it couldn't spread. But had we not been able to, have we not thought of this in advance? Have we not thought of secondary, tertiary controls, making sure that this is as tight as possible, including working the team members, 18, 20-hour days, that we can minimize uncertainty to as much as we can. We could have found ourselves in a situation where we lose elements of the environment again, and we lose back some of the backups again. And so you have to be in these situations on top of things as much as you can. The cost is that some of the team members, you really drive them to work, to bring them almost to the edge, if not to the edge. Also, this was height of COVID. And this was before vaccines were out. This was before the vaccines were out. We're all on site, masks on. It's add that element of complexity as well. And we were at the end of the day, we were successful. We covered the environment successfully, and pretty much in a few days. It's a very complex environment. We were surprised how fast we got it back up and running. So all in all, it was good, but it was extremely grueling, and some things could have gone really, really sideways. And every hour, like keep asking yourself, pardon my French, how can I fuck this up? How can this go sideways? How can this go sideways? And so you got to live that tension. You got to bring the calmness to it, but you also got to live that tension. You can't be too calm. Always keep reminding to yourself that things can go sideways pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned it earlier. You're dealing in a situation like that with a very low margin for error. Particularly in an incident like a ransomware incident, there is someone potentially in the network watching everything that you're doing is defending. Watching the things you're putting in place. It's very difficult. But you talked about earlier also about it could be, and we've talked about this on the show. Someone gets in, or you have an incident because of one mistake, one tiny thing. The attackers look for any sort of weakness.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, any vulnerability, any weakness, they're going to go in and exploit it. And it seems like even after you've worked the incident, started to clean it up, they're still going to be looking. It's a very challenging environment. So I wanted to ask you, are you still seeing where a lot of the incidents are caused by big mistakes or by smaller issues that manage to get exploited?
Yeah, I would argue this is our experience, Signia's experience, my
Okay.
experience. I would argue that the majority of incidents is usually not a big failure or one big catastrophe. The majority of the incidents that we face, a series of small mistakes. Usually it's bad IT practice. Rarely is it a vulnerability. It could be maybe on the outside on the way in, but once inside the environment, the game is how quickly can the threat actor leverage misconfigurations and identity and access management and network segmentation. That's the vast majority of the internal attack surface in a nutshell. That's not to say that vulnerabilities don't matter. It's not to say that patch management is not an issue. But one thing that we see today is, as the CISOs are overly concerned with things like vulnerability management and patch management, where in reality, most of the internal attack surface that is abused in these types of situations is not are not vulnerabilities. Especially when we see a lot. Many of the incidents that we respond to, the disruptive ones, the ransomware, be it ransomware or wiper attacks, are in OT, heavy OT environments, and and it should stop being surprised by now. But it's always strikes me as kind of uh, astounding to me how easily threat actors can move from ID to OT. And when you do the forensic investigation and we ask, hey, and many of the organizations would say, well, what do you mean? We've segregated that cannot happen, but it did. And in most cases, what we find is there are so many avenues, so many paths threat actor can leverage, can take, moving from that IT to OT. It's so convoluted, and what we try to do is to do away with that IT versus OT mentality. I almost fantasize about a day where the world where the that OT security is not a thing. We just deal with security because it's almost impossible nowadays to distinguish between the two.
Right, and just to let everyone know, OT is what we're talking about here. OT is the operational technology that we've talked about before. Things like building management systems, stuff that is outside of the traditional, IT computer environment. Traditionally they were kept separate, but now they're being linked to the point where, as David is saying, it doesn't make sense anymore to treat them separately. And in fact, it seems that distinction is historical. It's not real anymore, and it's being exploited. And if you're not going to really, acknowledge the reality of the situation the way it is, you can't secure it, and the bad guys take advantage. Right there.
I did an interview with a company, and a person asked me, what would you do? We have three different networks, and how would you handle these three different networks? One's a manufacturing network, one's a gaming network. When I say gaming, more like casinos, And I said, well, I need to understand more about what we're talking about. Are these IoTs? What type of devices? I said, but typically, and I said, we'll do a microsegmentation. We'll create a gateway network. You can only log into the network using, your Active Directory credentials. At the same time, you put EDR. You can't put EDR in IoT. So I went through this whole convoluted but extremely detailed answer. And I say convoluted because I didn't have enough facts. And I think I talked myself out of the job because it
Mm.
was so intense of a design that the person didn't understand it. They wanted to. I personally think they wanted to show their superiority. But when I said you can't put EDR on IoT, so you put this, you do not put the IP addresses on there. You even put physical security, watching the equipment to make sure nobody infiltrates it. You do this, you do this, you do that, and the person's like, uh, "Thank you for the answer." So the point I'm making is not one size fits all. If you can't put EDR and you can't put an agent on an IoT device, you have to do things from the network standpoint. But don't ever dismiss the physical aspect of watching the equipment as well to make sure that there's no physical penetration too. There's a lot of weird things you can do, but hey, I get it.
Yeah, it's a highly complex environment, and unfortunately, there there are misconceptions as to how to defend such complex environments. It's not. It's tempting to say back to basics, credential hygiene, segmentation, but in reality, when we see the majority of threat actors, I'm not talking about the apex predators. Every now and then you hear about how another nation state will manage to use a vulnerable PLC and inject something in the film. It's tempting to talk about these stories. There's something that there's a sexy element to them, but that's a distraction. What matters is how the vast majority of the organizations that are susceptible to these attacks, the attacks that they face, the threats that they face, are completely different in nature. And it's certainly possible to prevent these attacks, at the very least mitigate them significantly, and that it's not you don't have to do anything magical about it. This is more about back to basics.
And
So
I want, yeah, I wanted to just add, when I thought PLC, I'm thinking like power plants. I'm thinking dams. My lack of maturity and understanding did not think about manufacturing. I'll slap myself on the wrist for that, but I didn't think of a manufacturing plant.
so David, along those lines, and talking about the attacks that you're seeing now, what's happening? What's hot? I mean, is it still a lot of ransomware? I know everyone's talking about AI security, but
Yeah.
I've got to think there can't be many attacks just yet. But what are you battling
So
these days?
I would say, the attacks that we respond to, with the type of threats that we face, and the organizations that we work with globally, we're seeing three trends. One is that threat actors seem to be, at least from our experience, seem to be targeting more and more targeting of OT heavy organizations. And it sort of makes sense in a way, right? Because you would want to attack if your goal is monetization or sabotage, you will want to attack organizations that are more susceptible to disruptive attacks. Certainly critical infrastructure, but not only.
Well, Well, in those attacks, are you seeing that the OT, the manufacturing, the control systems, is the ultimate target, or they're using that as a way to get into the IT systems that
There
probably
are
hold more
nuances.
data?
It's a great question. There are nuances to this because it's not that the ultimate goal is that maybe that PLC, that SCADA, that DCS system, whatever. The ultimate goal is to stop the business from operating. And there are so many ways to get it done.
Oh,
You
okay,
don't have
okay.
to. You don't have to have this very sophisticated toolkit like that. Remember pipe dream. You don't have to have this very complex toolkit or malware framework to bring an OT organization down to its knees. It's enough that the ERP system or the SAP system is down in many cases, and that's why
Oh,
yeah
just the
that's
disruption.
why it's so
Okay.
convoluted because you have so many OT systems that are highly dependent on systems that we find in the IT environment. And I'm very careful in using these air quotes, but I do it purposefully because, again, we need to do away with the thinking that we'll have this beautifully segregated environments. This usually doesn't happen. Now, yeah,
Right.
Adam,
The
go ahead.
Yeah, the OT stuff that scares me is more along along the line of medical equipment, whether it's the medication drip, whether it's some of the equipment that's maintaining life life saving equipment in hospitals. That's what scares me. I also understand, like, dams and power plants are also important. And believe me, that's one of the biggest things I worry about. Logic bombs that are inside of these power plants, where a nation state can activate them if they get upset. Because that attack, and I wrote a paper on ethical warfare. That attack is what scares me. You're far removed. You're not boots on the ground. It's even more removed than being a drone pilot. If you decide that you want to hurt people and increase the medication, or or lessen the medication given to patients at a hospital, you can cause real life death, or real consequences.
Theoretically, it's possible, but I wouldn't bet on those attacks happening anytime soon because it's far simpler and far more damaging to just deploy something that's easy to deploy when this disrupts hospital operations or whatever it is that companies it has in their OT environment. I would and to your point, yeah, it is. Healthcare is way more complex because this is much more convoluted, and the margin for error is extremely low. And we had this case, not really an incident, but we were called in to investigate. This was a tragic incident that a patient died on the table because a system stopped functioning. And yeah, and it
Oh,
did, and
wow.
in a way that was very bizarre.
Gosh.
This was an anomaly. No one, this had never happened before. And there was an investigation, or they brought in the vendor to investigate, and they called us to assist to make sure that this is not anything cyber related, because this really was a bizarre,
I
tragic
see.
incident. And the result of the investigation was, of course, that this was not a result of a cyber attack. It was operated in a way that sort of caused a malfunction. I believe these were the results, and that's that. Now, it's the first time that we were called in to assist in such an investigation, but it's interesting that, and we expect that this will happen more and more often because there's certainly more awareness now that this is possible. But again, if you're a threat actor that managed to get inside a hospital network or networks, your ability to create damage to hurt really hurt the hospital, its employees, the patients, just deploy ransomware, deploy a wiper. It will cause a lot more havoc, a lot more damage. I will argue it will risk lives. Just enough that elective surgeries are now canceled for a while. And we have these attacks at home, and we've dealt with them, in different regions. It's a mess. Yeah.
Wow, but you're saying that for the most part, when it comes to the hospitals, they're, at least so far, haven't seen a lot of people going in, or attackers going in and trying to hurt people. It's more that they're trying to disrupt them as a business, to monetize
Yes, for
that.
sure. So when you there could be exceptions, and there could be attacks we've never heard of that was the case. But I would
Of
say
course.
that in rule of thumb is look for the monetization. We'll talk about AI in a second, right? And we'll touch on this for we'll touch about this. We'll touch on this aspect as well. Look for monetization. If the threat actors have no way to monetize off of this situation, then an attack would either be politically motivated or geopolitically motivated, or it's the stuff of Hollywood, and then probably less likely to happen.
Somebody in my family, I want to be a little bit anonymous here, was having chest issues, and we rushed that person to the hospital to only find out that their pacemaker was overclocked, and no one knows who brought up the rate, the beats per minute. they brought it back down, and thankfully that person's okay. But my point is, let's forget about even ransomware attacks or any type of threat actors. Sometimes we don't manage the IoT devices that are remotely controlled that can be changed with audit logs. At least they claim they don't know who did it. They know it was done. They just don't know who it is because anybody can log in from any hospital to that vendor as long as they have that information for that patient. So it did happen. We have documents to show that. We just don't know who did it. But thankfully, um, they're okay. But that's the point I'm making. If you can get into a portal, even if it's not an attack, who's controlling that IoT
Yeah,
medical
it's a big
device?
attack surface. It's a big attack surface, and for years now, it's been demonstrated that these machines are susceptible. I remember reading papers as far back as 2014, 2015, of how they could attack you have the pacemakers, defibrillators, and also for the new, what's it called? The other machines for the glucose monitors, right? The continuous glucose monitors.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the insulin
Oh,
pumps.
the insulin pumps.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
have these
yeah.
demonstrations,
Okay.
and again, it's very tempting and to talk about these, and I'm sure some attacks have been conducted, but the vast majority of it, if you cannot find monetization or hints of monetization or potential for monetization, it should probably not be exploited en masse.
Let's see. So
All in all.
follow the money. It gets back to that, I guess, with everything. Okay, so you were talking about the penetration through the exploiting OT. What other
The
evil
other
things are you
trend that
seeing
we've
out there?
seen in many of the attacks that we've responded to, excuse me, in the past, say, 18 months, more and more attacks that are conducted by governments or proxies of against private sector organizations. Now, we've known ever since the start of the war in the Ukraine
Oh, okay.
that many of these groups, especially the Russian-speaking one, sometimes they operate on behalf of, this from the counter leaks, but also from other fairly intel that we have, and they operate on behalf of, sometimes not even for monetization, right? And we know that it's in the interest of some of these governments to attack private sector organizations. So what we had with oil and gas or LNG, rest of the war, communications, if you remember the attack. That's at the beginning of the war, but ever since then, we've seen many attacks conducted by foreign adversaries against private sector organizations in the West, not only in the West, and with various ends. So we can go through some of that, but this is more concerning to me because we're seeing this. The lines are getting blurry. It used to be able, we could have, you remember this, right? Threat intel briefings, you have this triangle, and you have the hacktivist, and then the cybercrime, whatever level, and then there's the nation state sponsored, whatever that means, as if there's a huge sponsorship on a football game. It doesn't work like that. And at the very top, you have the nation state threat actors, the apex predators. Even then, it gets kind of nuanced. Nowadays, the lines are getting very blurry for various reasons. But it's definitely, we're seeing highly talented individuals that are moving in between those levels in the pyramid, and the fact and technology. Well, technology that the technology at their disposal really makes a difference.
So, Dave, are you saying that the next Super Bowl there might be like a threat group that sponsors a commercial or something? Is
Probably
that what
not
we're
the
saying?
American, yeah, Super Bowl, but actually, this is not. Jokes aside, we've seen some of these groups, some of these ransomware threat groups. We've seen them post. They're looking for penetration testers, and they're looking for whatever roles they have, access brokers. So, and by the way, we know this for some time now that many of these groups, they operate like a business. They have their own HR departments. They have marketing. They,
They have
yeah,
Right.
they
yeah,
have real
yeah, yeah.
support
It's
desks.
true.
I
It's
know
true.
that for a fact.
Yeah,
They have
I think
guarantees.
there was
Yeah.
one. There was one group I saw on the forums where they actually promised health and dental. And so this is we can joke about it all day, but think about it for a second, and this is not me making a moral taking a moral stance. This is just an observation. But think about it for a second. That for you, I have this amazing ecosystem in Tel Aviv. We have the valley. We have opportunities for many of the young, talented individuals, especially in that region of the world, that area of the world. They don't have a lot of opportunities, and some of these threat actors, they're seen as entrepreneurs. It's amazing. They live the life of an entrepreneur, and they're glorified. And it's not to stick it to the enemy. It's well, they've seized on a business opportunity. So again, not a moral stance, just an observation. Obviously, no. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting to see what's happening there, as we've seen in, unfortunately, a lot of other, enterprises. They get big, they get professional, they have codes and everything. But then and it's interesting, the from what I understand, a lot of the big ransomware operators will call their
Yeah,
victims
they do.
their
They do.
customers, and want to make sure that
Oh
they have
yeah,
a good reputation. Sometimes, and you're like, wow, yeah, they're so impressive, they're so great, and then you remember, they're criminals. And I will make a little bit of a judgment. It's kind of like watching The Sopranos or something, or The Godfather. Wow, these guys they're so cool, this is so interesting, they're so capable. And then you remember and you get a scene that shows, yeah, but they're
yeah.
criminals. These are not good guys.
I always had an
It's
issue
tough.
with these shows because they get you to sympathize with people who, at the end of the day, profit from other people's misery. So maybe we should. But when you
Right,
look at these,
right.
when we certainly have this experience negotiating with some threat actors, and this is quite the experience. Obviously, at the end of the day, there are humans behind that, behind the support chats or chat websites, uh, and, it, and at the end of the day, you're dealing with people who call themselves businessmen. They have a reputation to maintain, and they will say themselves, well, we have correspondence, right? Where they say reputation is more important than money. At the end of the day, it's kind of like this because reputation what gets them the money at the end. Because if the victim, yeah,
Right. That,
yeah,
that that's it. It's a very
exactly,
clever inversion of it, right? Their code of honor and their reputation is
exactly. You
about
need to
making
be able,
money.
yeah,
It's not about
for the
any moral
victim that
sense. It
was
is
attacked.
interesting.
What assurance do they have that they'll get the decryption keys and the fact and the threat actor will make good on the world not to publish the data? Reputation. That's it. That's it. They cannot afford to lose a reputation. They cannot. If ransom was at least for the top tier threat actors, what we had, and this happens quite often, is that we come in, we are called in to assist. The company was hacked. Ransomware was deployed. Uh, all right, we start negotiating with a threat actor, and they will identify as one of these top tier threat actors. But via the negotiation and the way that we negotiate and via the forensic investigation, we quickly learned that they are not who they say they are. And this is critical. This is critical. By the way, sometimes it can even be as
Right.
simple as, take the English that they correspond in English most of the times, and then take that, and it's obviously Google Translate from Chinese. Okay, so wait a minute, you're not the Russian threat actor that you claim to be. Happened to us more than a couple of times,
Okay.
and so this is very important. It's why it's critical to have that ability in your toolkit. You want to be able to negotiate and do the forensic investigation in conjunction. This is amazing. We can gain really valuable insights and intel on who they are, and then help executive leadership make that informed decision whether to pay or not to pay, which is not an easy one.
Hey, Dave. So let me ask you this: as a person who puts themselves in very precarious, dangerous situations, and I don't know if I can ask you this, but the anonymization of yourself, of you and the company, when you typically negotiate or deal with these threat actors, do you keep an anonymous uh, identification? Do you let them know
We
who you
we
guys
never.
are, or
Uh,
how does
we
that
should
work?
probably we'll keep. we won't discuss much of the tactics of how we do things, but obviously we don't ever identify as, right? It's not something that you do. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll I'll help you out. That I don't know your procedures, but I do know that generally, and just to let everyone know, when you get a big ransomware attack, they ask you for millions or tens of millions of dollars. You don't just pay it. There's a negotiation, and there are typically people who are you can hire who are professional, believe it or not, professional negotiators who know how to deal with these groups. Who some of them even get to know them and know some of their buttons, but then on the other side, of course, you don't want to tip off who's doing your negotiation because a lot of the groups, they don't like that. They obviously don't like you calling in help, and so especially competent help, and so that can actually make that not only be dangerous for the people involved, but that can sour the negotiation. It
Well,
really is. It really is
Yeah.
amazing. And there have been groups that have threatened and said, if you bring in a professional, if you bring in a security
This is
consultant,
actually
we will
it's
not
now
negotiate
it's
with
like
you,
it's
or
almost it's almost it
whatever.
is for some of these threat actors. It's boilerplate template in the ransomware. They don't bring in a third party.
Right.
well, I'm not going to discuss
Right.
CTPs, but I wanted to make sure our audience. I brought that out on purpose. I realize that Dave might be doing negotiations, and the oh, nice to see you again, Dave. Oh, we dealt with you 3 weeks ago. Yeah, let's renegotiate this one now too. I mean, I'm sure people's paths cross. I know that the industry is big, and I know there's a lot of threat actors, but some of these big threat actors, I'm sure, cross paths with the same incident response
I've
people more
seen
than once.
this without
I would
naming
have to
names. I've
believe that.
seen this happen with other companies where there was this, to me, I believe, unhealthy relationship in the way that they, yeah, in the way that,
Oh, really?
again, these are other companies, not us, not Signia, but I've seen elsewhere where other companies
Right.
brought in negotiators that identified as, and they had this sort of correspondence. As if seeing a long lost, not a long lost friend, but someone that they have a relationship with on a quarterly basis. It certainly facilitates some of the interaction, but I think it is ultimately unhealthy or detrimental.
That's
It can be
collusion.
detrimental to the and remember that we have one goal. In these situations, we have only one goal in life: to bring back business to normal operations as fast as humanly possible. That's it. Hmm.
This reminds me of that movie Proof of Life, where they're doing the negotiations and they know who they're
Yeah.
negotiating with.
Well, it also makes me think of, and maybe this is a little too television, but some of the situations where even if it's in the neighborhood, the cops know the crooks, they know who they are, and and they may even develop a certain relationship. But you have to remember, these are the bad guys. This is the adversary. They're not someone you want to be friendly with, and you certainly don't want to get in a position where they do get to know you and they can take advantage.
And that's an
Then,
interesting point, Joe. Right? In some countries, depending on where you are, law enforcement. I'm not saying they're always brought in, but there might be a kind of requirement to bring them in, and then you have to deal with the law enforcement, dealing with the negotiators, dealing with the threat actors, dealing with the caterers. I mean, I'm kind of being funny, but there's a whole procedure of things that have to happen, and sometimes that makes it so muddy.
okay, so that's some heavy stuff, and we are getting deep into the discussion here. Did we want to talk a little bit about
Yeah. Yeah.
AI that we mentioned? And I kind of suspect I know what you're going to say with some of it, but what are you seeing in
Well,
incident response with it these days, or what's on
maybe
your
I'll
mind as far
surprise
as
you.
that
Well,
goes?
we we didn't sit on our thumbs when that thing came out. So end of last year, ChatGPT, generative AI, think caught most of us by surprise. And it was clear to us that this thing
Right.
will explode in a bad way. I'm not talking about AI existential risk. That is a different topic, probably a different podcast. But even though I have a lot to say about that. Uh, we immediately realized that we should be more concerned of the short-term societal risks, and more to the point, how threat actors will leverage that. It's one aspect of it. So, uh, yeah,
Yes, it's
so
a great tool
we're
for
looking
them
at it. Hey,
too.
this will 10x your engineers. Everyone is a coder now. I remember that demonstration by Greg Brockman from OpenAI, where you can scribble how you want your website to look like, and it will create a website for you. Because now GPT-4 is multimodality, and you can just show the picture of. And it was clear to us that this will be abused, and we started seeing that. So we started seeing threat actors that we knew, or at least we thought we did, and suddenly they sort of 10x'd themselves. The phishing emails, more better, well articulated, and en masse, and we saw better code. I would say better is a complex. It might be a an understatement here, and in the sense that the way that technology is not inherently good or evil. That's a given. It's the way I use it, and so think about this technology that just empowers you to do this amazing stuff, and think about all the and I really use that term carefully, democratization of technology. No, I had a conversation with someone very executive, uh, someone at the top of almost at the top of the hierarchy of one of the big tech vendors that is at the forefront of bringing AI to the masses. And he told me
Okay.
that now they have these conversations with the US government, and especially uh, members of a National Security Council and similar agencies. And he told me that they talk to them about how this is great, and they're pushing this technology forward, and they care about democratization so that everyone has access. And the government agencies that this is not democratization, this is proliferation. And I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah.
As in, it's one thing to go on ChatGPT and oh, please write me a ransomware. And it will probably say, as an open large language model, I cannot blah blah blah. But then you can probably jailbreak it, and it will give you something. At least there's an at least there's an audit. At least there's an audit
It's
log.
easy to get around.
But it's one
Trivially
thing
easy.
different
Yeah.
entirely. No, when now many of these tools are open source, and you can pretty much run inference on a laptop without any guardrails, without any audit logs. Threat actors can build their own version of ChatGPT, and we suspect, because we built this ourselves, so we suspect that in short time, I like to abuse not abuse, but the Microsoft Copilot branding, which I like, and I believe that they're doing some amazing stuff on the defensive side. We'll talk about that. But yeah, we may witness an attacker Copilot. Why not? It's possible these days, because ever since the Meta Llama weights got leaked, and with the Llama CPP project that allows anyone to run inference on their laptop, and we've seen this Cambrian explosion of fine-tuned large language models, and anyone can run inference, and anyone can do stuff not the equivalent of ChatGPT, but not that far from it. So I'm
They're
So
pretty
I
good,
thought
and the open source is getting
yes and no.
closer quickly. That's true.
I have the yeah, I have experts in ChatGPT.
Hmm.
When I need to know about jailbreaking, I go to my kids. My kids know how to jailbreak ChatGPT for everything, and my son is so proud of himself. He did some of his homework with ChatGPT. Meanwhile, he's like in an honor roll. He's going to a specialized high school. My other child just graduated specialized high
Yeah,
school.
that's
They're all
by the
using
way
ChatGPT.
that's to me that's
It's
scary. I
amazing.
don't have kids, but this is not cyber related. But when we discuss short-term societal risks, I don't want to live in an age where when the first instinct a child has is, oh, you know what? Someone asked me a question, I'll ask ChatGPT. That's not a healthy society. Now that's the short, that's a short path thing. If you've seen the movie Wall-E, they end up on these floating devices, very thinking for themselves, right? So this is like the vision of the future, where
Right.
we lose the ability to think critically. Yeah. But it's a distraction. The thing that worries us, and we're seeing that we're seeing that
Oh,
threat actors can leverage it quite easily to 10x their operations, and this will happen now. Fortunately, we have
so
companies like Microsoft,
yeah.
like Google, and others who are pushing the envelope on bringing those capabilities uh, to the masses. So Microsoft announced the Security Copilot, Google announced the Google AI Workbench, and I am optimistic about us defenders having these abilities. It will take some time, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I worry about, the speed, because yeah, I kind of equate where AI is, and I don't know, maybe this is a tortured analogy, to kind of where automobiles were maybe in the 1910s or the 1920s or something, where they built these things that could go 80, 90 miles per hour, whatever. But people didn't know how to drive them. They didn't have brakes. They didn't have any safety systems. They didn't have roads and stoplights and everything. And it took a while for things to catch up. And I think here with AI, that we need to catch up quickly to put some of those safety systems in and to train people how to use it correctly before things get out of hand.
We can laugh about how Europeans regulate very quickly, or at least compared to the US. But I don't think I've seen in the past, with regards to I'm always referencing the EU AI Act, the new draft that was approved. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I haven't seen any regulator respond as quickly as we've seen with the EU AI Act. Now, some of the things that they've passed is draconic. It really is. But there are some issues. But this was a pretty quick response. I'm hoping that that this is a step in the right direction. It's not about stifling innovation. It's about making sure that we put guardrails in place. Uh, but this any regulation that that we'll adhere to here in say the West, EU, the US, it's not relevant for China. It's not relevant for Russia. It's not relevant for other countries that will just they have no interest in adhering to this regulation.
Well, even any regulations that
Yeah.
are done need to be well considered in a lot of aspects. And unfortunately, government regulations, especially when they're put out very quickly, are often not well considered and can have consequences. So we'll say.
Yeah. But by the way, I haven't fully answered your question because we've talked about how threat actors can leverage AI to further their own. But one aspect, it's almost orthogonal to this one that we've been researching, is AI as an attack surface. And we've had lots of conversations with CISOs, CIOs, heads of engineering at various companies where they are rushing to embed large language models and generative AI into their pipelines, whether that's the CI/CD pipeline or further up the stack, but in their production environment. And they open up this whole new attack surface, virtually uncharted territory. And it's very interesting to explore that territory because we've already seen some minor demonstrations. Prompt injection is just the tip of the iceberg. But you can imagine, it's almost like the start of the internet. People are finding out the first cross-site scripting in a way. So you can only imagine this will get worse and worse.
Well, I think it's not just a matter of the ways to exploit it and trick it and attack it in those ways. I also worry about the general reliability of it. So many people are jumping in. I love the term hallucination. Somehow someone came up with the term of hallucination, which to me is a euphemism for when the AI is wrong, when it's being used in a way that it shouldn't be used. It is not good at answering certain questions, and it's just plain wrong sometimes. And that's something that can probably be exploited too in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. By the way, I had an interesting conversation with various CISOs that they were charged, or they were asked, or at least they were told that they need to somehow solve or at least address issues that have to do with bias and ethics within the products that the company uh, make, and which security people, yeah. I mean, we've been,
CISO,
yeah, yes,
security
and this
people
was
were
amazing to
being asked
me.
about
It was
this.
amazing to me because
Okay.
Yeah.
somewhere, where's the delineation between, okay, as CISOs, we are in charge of securing the company, the organization against cyber attacks. But why? There's these CISOs ask, why am I responsible for making sure that our chatbot doesn't do something it shouldn't, not something unsafe from a security perspective, but something that reply in a way that insults the customer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because
And
somebody has to take the responsibility. I'm not saying it's right, but somebody has to take the responsibility. So why not throw it on the person or people that are utilizing or the predominant consumers and
Yeah. So
supporter of
no,
that
no. So
tool?
this was a very heated
I'm not
debate,
saying it's right.
yeah,
and some said, yeah. And so CISOs and
that is
CIOs,
interesting. I hadn't
and
heard
this
that
was
one.
a very heated debate, and they said, look, we get it, but we don't know who inside the organization. We don't know who to turn to. And someone said, we have risk functions. This is a risk, not a cyber risk. Risk function should somehow address it. Yeah, but they use the chatbot. And so this very, very heated debate, and who's responsible? Because you think about it, it's a question of the attack surface. If you use a prompt injection, which to us almost immediately when it's vocalized, we think about a cyber attack, right? Prompt injection. Then oh yeah, we're security. No, so but if a prompt injection leads to the chatbot behaving in a way it shouldn't, but not in a way that leaks information or allows the threat actor way inside, then is it a security issue? So one way to answer is, and some CISOs were very adamant on this. No, we have to draw a line in the sand. I don't want to be, I don't want to handle this risk as well. Another, we had another group of CISOs. They said, you know what? Maybe times are changing, and maybe the role of the CISO will change accordingly as we take charge of this technology as well. And it's difficult to answer. This is a difficult one. I'm still struggling with this myself.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, from my perspective, just hearing it, it doesn't seem to me like it's the realm of the CISO. It almost seems like it's more, compliance and operational controls. If we're going to get either a person or a tool, we need the process to ensure that it's effective, that it's controlled. I mean, machines don't have ethics. There is no such concept. People
Can,
do.
I
Organizations have to follow those codes.
let's steer away from compliance and order because I'm married to one and I don't want to get hurt.
That's right. So we've been talking for quite a bit, and I think we're getting to last call here, as we call it. And David, we had, I think, Adam had two final questions for you. So Adam, what have we got?
Well, I was going to ask you about 0 days. I'm not sure if
Well,
that's on
yeah,
the on
we
the
can ask me
table for
about zero
discussion.
days. Yeah, but my answer was surprise. A couple of, I
Well,
would say, how many 0 days I found?
Twice?
I would say
I
a
thought it
couple
was
of
more than
critical
that.
ones, but I would then argue that, referencing a part of the previous discussion that we had, that 0 days these days, I'm not belittling, I'm not diminishing the role they play, but in almost 9 times out of 10, in the major incidents that we respond to, it's not a 0 day. It's not even the nation, the ones that conducted by the more advanced nation states. It's not necessarily 0 days. It's a series of misconfigurations and taking advantage of the complexity of the environment that allows threat actors to complete their mission objective.
Got it. Thank you. And this is probably what our audience has been waiting for. This whole entire conversation podcast.
Huh,
Where is your
always want
go-to
to swap
place
food.
for shawarma and
I
falafel?
am not a foodie, so maybe I'm not the person to ask, but there's a nice place right around the block that makes decent shawarma. A great neighborhood place
Ah, there
called.
you go. A neighborhood
I don't
place.
want to. I don't
That's
know. Call
great.
this is like a. I don't want to. No, I don't want to. Like, there's just free advertising, but this is a business.
No, you don't want to say
Yeah, yeah,
where you live,
definitely.
but that's cool. Your favorite place is the neighborhood place.
But not
That's so
necessarily.
down
Not
home.
sure you should
That's
take
so
my
cool.
advice
That's
on it. I'm not a
awesome.
foodie. To me, food is
So,
sustenance, and should really focus should be on eating healthy and low carb diet. So not necessarily the best source of information for shawarma.
yeah. Well, you know what?
Yeah,
So this
well,
is
yeah.
what I
Adam's
learned.
getting right on that, the low carb diet. So,
I'm okay. But so my thing is, I'm learning, and my wife showed me. You cut the pita, you put in a little hummus, you put in some shawarma meat,
Yep, simple,
then you put in a
simple does it.
pickle, and you eat it. It's good.
there you go. Okay, we'll have to do a food series at some point. But
That's
all
all.
right.
May I recommend
Well,
Cyber AI Warrior: The Return of the Jedi for a second episode?
Well, I'm more of a Emperor Palpatine fan, but yeah, we'll see
no.
about
Well,
that. Nice.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This has been
well,
great.
David, thanks so much
Likewise.
for joining us. It's always great to see you, and certainly it's always great to get your insights, especially as you're coming fresh off a big conference and you know what's going on. So it's great to hear. And I'll also say, hearing the for people like us who have to defend, it's really important to know what the attackers are doing and what they're having success with, so that we can defend against it. So
Thanks.
it's not just
Thanks for
fun to
having me.
hear it; it's very
It's good to see
important,
you.
and
Yes,
we
sir.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Take care.